Today we're going to be studying section 3.4, long and synthetic division of polynomials. Up until this point, we've always been able to factor or use the quadratic formula to find the zeros of polynomials. And now we're getting to the point where we're not going to be able to do that as easily. So we have to remember a process known as long division. So think back to your elementary days when you first learned how to divide. You were approached with a situation like this. Typically, your big number was called your dividend, and this was called your divisor. And you drew your little house, and 345 went underneath the house, and 7 went outside. And you went through. And you said, how many times does 7 go into 3? Well, it doesn't go in at all. So then you go to 34. How many times does 7 go into 34? Well, I know that 7 times 3 is 21, 7 times 4 is 28, 7 times 5 is 35, so the maximum number 7 goes into 34 is 4 times. And then you subtract. 34 minus 28 is 6. And then you drop down the 5. So then you want to think, how many times does 7 go into 65? 7 times 9 is 63. So you write your 9 here, then you multiply 63, you get 2 left over. So it's 49 with a remainder of 2. We can apply the same concept to polynomials. This is your dividend, and this is your divisor. So I have x minus 2 goes on the outside, and 6x cubed minus 19x squared plus 16x minus 4 goes inside the house. You'll start with the first term, and you really only need to look at the x here. So how many times does x go into x cubed? Well, that would be 6x squared times, because 6x squared times x would give me 6x cubed. Okay, then you multiply, just like before. So you get 6x cubed, and then 6x times negative 2 is negative 12x squared. And then you subtract. So these cancel, which is what you want to happen. And you have negative 19 minus negative 12, or negative 19 plus 12, which ends up being 7x squared. Negative 7x squared. And then you drop down everything. And you repeat the process. So how many times does x go into negative 7x squared? X goes into negative 7x squared, negative 7x times. So negative 7x times x gives me negative 7x squared. And negative 7 times negative 2 is positive 14x. And then I subtract, just like in long division. So negative 7x squared minus 7x squared cancels, which is what you want to happen. And then I have negative 16x minus positive 14x. So that makes negative 28x. And now I'll drop down the 4. And then for my final step, I need to repeat the process. So I have, how many times will x go into negative 28? X, and that's negative 28 times. And then you multiply. Negative 28 times x is negative 28x. And then negative 28 times negative 2 is positive 66. And then you subtract again. So those cancel. And you are left with 4 minus negative 56, which is negative 60. So just like before, we have a remainder. We express our remainder like this. We don't necessarily say remainder negative 60. We express our answer as 6x squared minus 7x minus 28 plus my remainder, negative 60 over x minus 2. And that would be my answer. Let's try another one. Divide x cubed minus 1 by x minus 1. So again, this is our divisor, and this is our dividend. But when I do this, I actually need to account for the terms that aren't there. So I don't have a 0, or I don't have an x squared term. I also do not have an x term. I need those placeholders in there, otherwise it's going to throw off my math. So I focus on my first number here. How many times does x go into x cubed? And that would be x squared times. I always like to write them lined up on the columns. Now I multiply. X squared times x is x cubed. X squared times negative 1 is negative x squared. And now I subtract. X cubed minus x cubed cancels. And then 0x squared minus negative x squared is just positive x squared. And then everything drops down. And now I repeat the process. How many times does x go into x squared? Well, that would just be x. Times x is x squared. X times negative 1 is negative x. And then I subtract. The x squareds cancel. I have 0x minus negative x. So that makes positive x minus 1. How many times does x go into x? That would just be 1 time. And then I multiply the 1. 1 times x is x. And 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. This time, when I subtract, all the things cancel out, and I have no remainder, which means that x squared plus x plus 1 and x minus 1 are both perfect factors of x to the third minus 1. And we'll stop there for today. Please write down any questions that we'll have, and we will continue this in class.